coffee maker gurgled to life at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes earlier than yesterday. I stood in our kitchen doorway, watching my wife Samantha hum while she prepared her travel mug with the kind of care usually reserved for newborns. Her movements had a spring to them that I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. "You're up early again," I said, my voice still rough with sleep. She spun around, that new brightness lighting up her face. "Oh, Eliot, you startled me. Yes, well, you know how it is. Big project launching today." Big project, right. The same project that had been launching for 3 weeks now, ever since Will Foster rejoined Morrison and Associates as her new business partner. Will Foster, the college boyfriend she'd mentioned exactly twice in our 8 years of marriage, and now his name seemed to slip from her lips like honey. "Coffee smells good," I offered, reaching for a mug. "Actually, I made just enough for one." She clutched her travel mug protectively. "You know how the machine is, temperamental with larger batches." I knew that coffee maker better than most people knew their own children. I'd fixed it 4 times in the past 2 years. It could brew 12 cups without breaking a sweat. But I just nodded and watched her gather her things with unusual efficiency. "Will and I are meeting early to review the Henderson proposal," she continued, checking her reflection in the microwave door. "Might be another late night." Another late night. That made it 12 in the past 3 weeks. I'd been counting. "Henderson's a tough client," I said. "Good thing you've got, what's his name again? Your new partner?" "Will Foster." The name practically sang out of her mouth. Her pupils dilated slightly, just a fraction, but I'd learned to notice these things. 8 years of marriage teaches you to read the small print. He's brilliant with client relations, really knows how to handle difficult personalities. I'll bet he does, I thought, but kept my expression neutral. Sounds like a real asset to the team. "Oh, he is." She was practically glowing now. "You'd like him, actually. He's got this way of seeing through problems, finding solutions nobody else thinks of. Maybe I should meet him sometime." The brightness flickered for just a moment. "Maybe, though you know how busy things are right now. Rain check?" She kissed my cheek, a quick, distracted peck, and headed for the door. I watched through the kitchen window as she backed out of our driveway, noting how she immediately reached for her phone the moment she thought she was out of sight. I poured myself a glass of orange juice and settled at the kitchen table with my tablet. Morrison and Associates had a website with staff photos. It took me exactly 30 seconds to find Will Foster's professional headshot. Square jaw, perfect teeth, the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never met a problem he couldn't charm his way through. According to his bio, he'd spent the last 5 years building his own consulting firm in Portland before returning to his roots at Morrison and Associates. Interesting phrase. Returning to his roots made it sound like he'd been planning this comeback all along. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. "Forgot to mention, working lunch today too. Don't wait up if you don't hear from me by 8. Don't wait up. At 8 p.m., for a woman who used to call if she'd be 15 minutes late from the grocery store. I finished my juice and headed down to my workshop in the basement. 30 years as an auto mechanic had taught me that when something starts making new noises, you don't ignore it. You investigate. You trace the problem to its source, and then you fix it. The question was, what exactly needed fixing here? 3 days later, I had my answer, or at least the beginning of one. Samantha's phone had become her most prized possession. She carried it everywhere, bathroom, kitchen, even to bed, and always, always face down. The woman who used to leave her phone charging in the kitchen overnight now clutched it like a lifeline. "Yeah, who keeps texting you?" I asked Thursday evening as her phone buzzed for the 6th time during dinner. "Just work stuff." She flipped the phone face down without looking. "You know how it is with the Henderson project." But I'd caught a glimpse of the screen. The message preview showed a name, Will, and the beginning of what looked like "Can't wait to see you, Tom," before she'd turned it over. "Must be some project," I said. "Henderson's really putting you through your paces." "Mm-hmm." She was scrolling through something now, and I watched her face change. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Not the polite smile she gave me, but something warmer, more genuine. Then she caught herself and quickly deleted whatever she'd been reading. "Everything okay?" "Fine, just client feedback. You know how they can be." She set the phone aside and took a bite of her pasta. "How was your day? Mrs. Patterson pick up her Camry?" Small talk. Safe territory. We spent the rest of dinner discussing my customers, her mother's upcoming birthday, the weather forecast. Normal married couple conversation, but her phone sat between us like a third person at the table, buzzing occasionally with messages she wouldn't read in front of me. Later that night, I lay awake listening to her breathing. Around midnight, I heard the soft chime of an incoming text. In the darkness, I watched her carefully lift her phone, shield the screen with her hand, and read whatever had just arrived. The blue glow illuminated her face for maybe 10 seconds. Then she typed a quick response and set the phone back down. She thought I was asleep, but I'd been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and trying to piece together the puzzle of my wife's new behavior. The next morning brought more of the same routine: early wake-up, careful preparation, that same bright energy. But this time, I was ready. "I need to drop by Morrison & Associates today," I announced over breakfast. "Insurance company wants me to look at that fender bender claim from last month. Thought I'd surprise you with lunch." The coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. "Today?" "Around noon. That work for you?" "Actually, Will and I have a client lunch today, off-site, with Henderson's people." The words came out in a rush. "Rain check again?" "Sure." I kept my voice casual. "Maybe next week." But I didn't wait until next week. At 12:15 p.m., I parked across the street from Morrison & Associates and watched the glass-fronted lobby. At 12:23, I saw them. Samantha emerged from the elevator wearing her navy blue dress, the one she'd bought for our anniversary dinner but claimed was too fancy when I'd suggested she wear it. She was laughing at something, her head tilted back in genuine delight. Beside her walked a man who matched Will Foster's website photo perfectly. I watched him place his hand on the small of her back as they approached the lobby doors, watched her turn toward him, her face animated in a way I hadn't seen in months. And then, just before they stepped outside, I watched her rise on her tiptoes and brush her lips against his cheek, not the quick, distracted peck she'd given me that morning, but something deliberate and intimate. They climbed into his silver Tesla and drove away, leaving me sitting in my 10-year-old pickup truck with the uncomfortable realization that my wife's client lunch looked an awful lot like a date. I sat there for another 20 minutes, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Then I drove home, pulled up Will Foster's professional profile again, and started digging deeper. Morrison & Associates' website listed him as a senior partner, with extensive experience in client relations and business development. But a quick search of Maine's business registration database told a different story. Will Foster's previous consulting firm had been dissolved 6 months ago. Not sold, not merged, dissolved. The kind of dissolution that usually meant one thing: failure. I spent the rest of the afternoon learning everything I could about Will Foster. By dinner time, I had a clearer picture of my wife's new business partner, and it wasn't pretty. Saturday morning, while Samantha slept in, a luxury she'd suddenly started allowing herself on weekends, I made my way to the garage. Her Honda Civic sat in its usual spot, keys hanging on the hook by the door. 30 years of working on cars had taught me that modern vehicles are basically computers on wheels. Every trip, every route, every stop gets logged in the car's telematics system. Most people don't know this. Most people don't need to know this. But I'm not most people. I connected my diagnostic scanner to the port under Samantha's dashboard and downloaded 3 weeks' worth of GPS data. The process took about 10 minutes. The analysis took considerably longer. According to the timestamps, Samantha had been telling the truth about working late. Her car had indeed left Morrison & Associates after 8 p.m. on most of those 12 nights I'd been counting. The problem was where it went next. Instead of heading straight home, a 12-minute drive down Maple Street and Oak Avenue, the GPS showed a different pattern. Night after night, her car had taken a detour through downtown Portland, ending up at 1247 Harbor View Drive. It stayed there for anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours before finally heading home. I cross-referenced the address with public records. 1247 Harbor View Drive was a luxury condo complex called The Meridian. Unit 304 was registered to one William C. Foster. So much for working late at the office. I printed out the GPS logs and spread them across my workbench like pieces of a puzzle. The pattern was clear. 3 weeks ago, Samantha's evening routes had changed completely. Before that, straight home from work, occasional stops at the grocery store or gym. After Will Foster joined Morrison & Associates, her car had developed a strong magnetic attraction to his address. But the GPS data revealed something else interesting. On several occasions, both cars, Samantha's Honda and Will's Tesla, had traveled to locations that weren't either of their homes or the office. Restaurants, mostly. A hotel bar downtown. Once, inexplicably, to a scenic overlook about 20 miles outside the city. That last one bothered me. What kind of client meeting required a drive to Sunset Point at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday? I was still studying the printouts when I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. "Eliot, what are you doing down there?" Samantha appeared at the bottom of the stairs, still in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. She looked younger somehow, more like the woman I'd married 8 years ago. Just organizing some paperwork, I said, casually sliding the GPS logs under a stack of invoices. Insurance stuff. You know how it is. She padded over to where I was sitting, and for a moment I thought she might see the papers. Instead, she wrapped her arms around my shoulders from behind and rested her chin on top of my head. "You work too hard," she said softly. "It's Saturday. Come back to bed." The gesture was so unexpected, so reminiscent of our early days together, that I almost forgot about the evidence spread across my workbench. Almost. "In a minute," I said. "Just want to finish this up." She kissed the top of my head and headed back upstairs. I waited until I heard the shower running, then pulled out the GPS logs again. There was one more thing I needed to check. Modern cars don't just track location, they track everything. Speed, acceleration, braking patterns, even whether the radio was on and what station it was tuned to. But the most interesting data point was something called auxiliary device connectivity. In plain English, whose phone had been connected to the car's Bluetooth system. For the past 3 years, only 2 devices had ever connected to Samantha's Honda, her iPhone and mine. But starting 3 weeks ago, a third device had joined the party. The system identified it as Will's iPhone. So not only had Will Foster been riding in my wife's car, he'd been comfortable enough to connect his phone to her stereo system, the kind of casual intimacy that suggested this wasn't their first rodeo. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the evidence. GPS logs showing regular visits to his condo, Bluetooth records proving he'd been in her car, 3 weeks of late nights that weren't actually spent at the office. The picture was becoming clearer, but I still didn't understand the why. That's when I remembered something Samantha had said the first morning I'd noticed her new brightness. He's got this way of seeing through problems, finding solutions nobody else thinks of. What kind of problems was Will Foster solving for my wife, and what kind of solutions was he offering? I had a feeling the answers to those questions would be even more interesting than the GPS data. Sunday dinner at Samantha's sister Jennifer's house had always been a monthly tradition. Jennifer, her husband Mike, and their twin 8-year-olds made for chaotic but entertaining company. Usually, Samantha enjoyed these gatherings. She was the fun aunt, the one who remembered to bring board games and helped with homework. But tonight, she seemed distracted. "Earth to Samantha," Jennifer said, waving a hand in front of my wife's face. "I asked if you wanted more wine." "Sorry, what?" Samantha looked up from her phone, which she'd been checking under the table. "Wine? Yes, please." "You've been checking that thing all evening," Mike observed. "Must be some important client." "Just work," Samantha said, but I caught the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. "You know how it is." "Actually, I don't," Mike replied. He was an accountant, the kind who left his phone in his car during family dinners. "What's so urgent it can't wait until Monday?" "New business partner," I said casually, watching Samantha's face. "Will Foster. Samantha's been telling me how brilliant he is." The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Her pupils dilated slightly, her posture straightened, and that brightness I'd been cataloging for weeks lit up her features. "Will's just very dedicated," she said, but her voice had that same musical quality I'd noticed whenever his name came up. "He brings a lot of energy to the projects." "Energy," Jennifer repeated with a smirk. "Is that what we're calling it these days?" "Jennifer," Samantha warned, but she was smiling. "What? I'm just saying, you've got that glow, like when you first started dating Eliot, remember? All dreamy and distracted." The brightness flickered and died. Samantha's expression cooled noticeably. "It's not like that," she said firmly. "Will and I work together, that's all." But her phone buzzed at that exact moment, and despite her protests, she immediately reached for it. The glow returned as she read whatever message had just arrived. "Sorry," she said, typing a quick response. "Client emergency." "On Sunday night?" Mike asked. "Business doesn't stop for weekends," Samantha replied, but she was still smiling at her screen. I spent the rest of the evening conducting my own informal experiment. Every time I mentioned Will Foster's name, which I did 6 more times in various contexts, Samantha's body language shifted. Brighter expression, higher vocal pitch, more animated gestures. It was like watching someone respond to a drug. The drive home was quiet. Samantha stared out the passenger window while her phone sat in her lap, occasionally lighting up with new messages that she read, but didn't answer in front of me. "Jennifer was just teasing," I said as we pulled into our driveway. "You know how she is?" "I know," but her voice was distant. "This Will guy must be something special, though. I don't think I've ever seen you this excited about a work project." She turned to look at me then, and for a moment I thought she might say something real, something honest. Instead, she just smiled that polite smile I'd been getting for weeks. He's a good partner, she said. That's all. But as we walked into the house, I heard her phone chime with another message. And despite everything she'd just said, despite her sister's teasing and her husband's questions, she immediately pulled out her phone to read it. The brightness was back. That night, I lay awake thinking about behavioral tells. In my line of work, you learn to read the signs when something's wrong with an engine. The slight hesitation before acceleration. The almost imperceptible vibration that signals bearing wear. The change in exhaust note that means trouble's coming. People weren't so different from cars, I realized. They gave off signals when something was wrong. Or in Samantha's case, when something was very, very right. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Tuesday afternoon, I made a decision. Instead of calling ahead or sending a text, I drove straight to Morrison & Associates with a bouquet of flowers and a story about wanting to surprise my wife. The lobby was all glass and steel, the kind of modern design that looked impressive but felt cold. A receptionist with perfectly styled hair and a practiced smile greeted me from behind a curved desk. "I'm here to see Samantha Harrow," I said, holding up the flowers. "Thought I'd surprise her." "How sweet. Let me call up and—" "Actually, don't." I gave her my most charming smile. "I want it to be a real surprise. What floor is she on?" "Third floor, but I really should." "Thanks. I'll find her." I headed for the elevator, but instead of going up, I positioned myself where I could see through the glass doors that led to the parking garage. If my timing was right, and if the pattern I'd observed held true, I wouldn't have to wait long. At 4:47 p.m., the elevator chimed. Samantha emerged, and she wasn't alone. Will Foster looked exactly like his photo, but seeing him in person added details the website couldn't capture. He moved with a kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. Designer suit, expensive watch, the posture of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. More importantly, he moved like someone who was comfortable with my wife. Very comfortable. They were deep in conversation as they crossed the lobby, Samantha's animated gestures suggesting whatever they were discussing was fascinating to her. When they reached the glass doors, Will placed his hand on the small of her back. The same gesture I'd witnessed before, but now I could see it was completely natural for him. Familiar. Then Samantha turned toward him, and I watched my wife of 8 years reach up and adjust his tie with an intimacy that made my chest tight. Her fingers lingered on the silk fabric longer than necessary. He said something that made her laugh, and she rose on her tiptoes to brush her lips against his cheek. But this wasn't the quick, distracted kiss she'd given me that morning. This was deliberate, affectionate, the kind of kiss that suggested it wasn't the first and wouldn't be the last. They walked toward his Tesla together, Samantha's hand finding his arm as naturally as if they'd been together for years instead of weeks. I stood in that cold lobby, holding a bouquet of flowers for a wife who was climbing into another man's car, and felt something shift inside me. Not heartbreak. That would come later. This was something colder, more calculating. I walked back to the receptionist's desk. "Actually, I think I'll wait," I told her. "When did you say Samantha usually gets back from client meetings?" "Oh, she left for the day," the receptionist said cheerfully. "Had an off-site meeting. Probably won't be back until tomorrow." "Off-site meeting. Right." I set the flowers on her desk. "Could you make sure she gets these? Tell her they're from someone who's thinking about her." The drive home gave me time to think, time to move past the immediate emotional response and start planning. Because that's what this situation called for now. Planning. I'd spent 3 weeks gathering evidence and hoping I was wrong. The GPS data, the phone behavior, the brightness test. I'd been building a case while secretly hoping it would all have an innocent explanation. But there was nothing innocent about what I'd just witnessed. The casual intimacy, the comfortable familiarity, the way they moved together like a couple who'd been together much longer than 3 weeks. Which raised an interesting question. If Will Foster had only joined Morrison & Associates 3 weeks ago, how long had he and Samantha actually been in contact? I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a few minutes, thinking. Then I walked into my house, poured myself a beer, and fired up my laptop. It was time to find out exactly who Will Foster was and what he wanted with my wife. The internet is a beautiful thing when you know how to use it. Within an hour, I had a much clearer picture of Will Foster's recent history. And it wasn't the success story Morrison & Associates' website suggested. His consulting firm hadn't just been dissolved, it had been shut down by creditors. He owed money to everyone, suppliers, landlords, the IRS. His personal finances were a disaster zone of defaulted loans and maxed-out credit cards. So what was a man with that kind of financial pressure doing back in Maine, working at his ex-girlfriend's company? I had a few ideas. None of them were good. Wednesday evening, Samantha came home at 9:30 p.m. with takeout Chinese food and an apologetic smile. "Sorry I'm so late," she said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "Will and I got caught up in the Henderson presentation. Lost track of time." "No problem," I said, helping her unpack the containers. "How's that going anyway, the Henderson project?" "Really well, actually. Will has some innovative ideas for their market expansion. He's got this background in, well, it's complicated, but he knows how to think outside the box." Sounds like Morrison and Associates got lucky, landing someone with his experience. "Definitely." She was glowing again, just from talking about him. He could probably start his own firm again if he wanted to. He's got the skills. Again? A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed her face. "I mean, theoretically, if he ever wanted to go independent." "Right." I opened a container of lo mein and inhaled the steam. "Must be nice, working with someone so talented. Makes you wonder why he left his old job." "Career change," she said quickly. "Sometimes people want new challenges." But I'd done my homework. Will Foster hadn't left his previous position. He'd been forced out when his company collapsed under a mountain of debt. The kind of debt that didn't just disappear when you started a new job. "Well," I said, twirling noodles around my fork, "Morrison and Associates' gain is everyone else's loss, I guess." We ate dinner while Samantha told me about her day, carefully editing out any details that might reveal what she'd actually been doing for the past 5 hours. I nodded and asked appropriate questions while mentally cataloging the inconsistencies in her story. After dinner, while she was in the shower, I did some more research. This time, I focused on Morrison and Associates itself, specifically their client list and project portfolios. What I found was interesting. Morrison and Associates handled some significant accounts, companies with valuable proprietary information, trade secrets, client databases, the kind of information that would be worth money to the right buyer, or the wrong buyer, depending on your perspective. I was starting to form a theory about Will Foster's real motivations for returning to Maine, and it had nothing to do with career changes or new challenges. On Thursday morning, I made a phone call to my buddy Frank, who worked in corporate security. "I need a favor," I told him. "Background check on someone, quiet and unofficial." "What kind of background check?" "The kind that goes deeper than LinkedIn." Frank owed me for some work I'd done on his daughter's car, so he agreed to look into Will Foster's recent activities. What he found confirmed my suspicions. "Your boy's got problems," Frank told me that afternoon. "Big problems. IRS liens, defaulted business loans, credit cards and collections. He's looking at personal bankruptcy if he doesn't find a major source of income soon." "How major?" 6 figures, minimum, and that's just to get current on his debts." "Interesting. What about his professional background? Any red flags?" "Depends what you mean by red flags. He's never been arrested, if that's what you're asking. But his business practices were questionable. A lot of unhappy clients when his firm went under. Some are still trying to recover money they paid for services that were never delivered." I thanked Frank and hung up, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Will Foster wasn't just my wife's ex-boyfriend who'd conveniently returned to rekindle their romance. He was a desperate man with serious financial problems who'd somehow landed a partnership position at a company with access to valuable information. The question was, what did he need Samantha for? That evening, I got my answer. Samantha's laptop sat on our kitchen counter, forgotten in her rush to get ready for another late client meeting. She'd been so focused on her phone, which had been buzzing constantly all afternoon, that she'd left without her usual careful attention to digital security. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm not ashamed of it either. Her laptop was still logged into her iCloud account, which meant I had access to her message history across all devices, including the messages she'd been so carefully deleting from her phone. It took me about 20 minutes to recover 3 weeks' worth of deleted text conversations. What I found made my blood run cold. The messages between Samantha and Will started innocuous enough. Work discussions, project updates, the kind of professional communication you'd expect between business partners, but they quickly evolved into something else entirely. "Will, working with you again feels like coming home." Samantha: "I'd forgotten how well we worked together." Will: "I've missed this. Missed us." Samantha: "We're not us anymore. I'm married now." Will: "Are you happy?" The conversation had a 3-hour gap after that question. When it resumed, Samantha's tone had shifted. Samantha: "That's not fair." Will: "I'm not trying to be fair. I'm trying to be honest. I made a mistake letting you go." Samantha: "That was a long time ago." Will: "Doesn't feel like it. Does it feel like it to you?" Another gap. Then, Samantha. No. The messages became more frequent after that exchange, more personal. But they also revealed something else, something that explained why Will Foster had really returned to Maine. Will, I need your help with something. It's complicated. Samantha. What kind of help? Will. The kind that requires someone I trust completely. Samantha. Will. I'm in trouble, Sam. Real trouble. The kind that could destroy everything I've worked for. Samantha. What happened? Will. Bad investments. Worse decisions. I owe people money I don't have. Samantha. How much money? Will. Enough that I need to think creatively about solutions? The conversation that followed made my stomach turn. Will Foster wasn't just rekindling a romance with my wife. He was recruiting her for something that sounded suspiciously like corporate espionage. Will. Morrison and Associates has access to client data that would be valuable to certain competitors. Samantha. You're talking about stealing information. Will. I'm talking about leveraging assets, your assets. Samantha. I could lose my job, my license. Will. Only if we get caught, and we won't get caught because you're too smart for that. Samantha. I need to think about this. Will. Don't think too long. My creditors aren't known for their patience. The most recent messages were the most damning. Samantha had agreed to help him access client databases, using her administrative privileges to copy sensitive information that Will could sell to competitors. But the last exchange revealed something that hit me like a punch to the gut. Will, once this is over, once I'm clear of my debts, we can be together properly. Samantha. What about Eliot? Will. What about him? You said yourself the marriage has been over for years. Samantha. I never said that. Will. You didn't have to. It's written all over your face every time you mention him. Samantha. It's complicated. Will. It doesn't have to be. Help me with this, and we can start fresh, somewhere new, just like we always planned. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my wife's laptop screen, and felt the last pieces of my marriage crumble around me. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complete betrayal on every level imaginable. But as I read through the messages again, I noticed something interesting. Will Foster was so focused on manipulating Samantha that he'd left a digital trail of his entire criminal conspiracy. Every detail of his plan was documented in black and white, which gave me an idea. If Will Foster wanted to play games with other people's lives, I was more than happy to teach him the rules. Friday morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day becoming an expert in corporate fraud investigation. By afternoon, I had a plan. The first step was documenting everything. I printed out all the recovered text messages, organized them chronologically, and created a timeline of Will Foster's recruitment of my wife. Then, I cross-referenced the dates with Samantha's GPS logs and found perfect correlation. Every major conversation about their scheme had taken place during those mysterious visits to his condo. The second step was more complex. I needed to understand exactly what they were planning to steal and who they were planning to sell it to. Morrison and Associates' website listed their major clients: 3 manufacturing companies, a regional bank, 2 healthcare systems, and a technology firm that specialized in government contracts. Any one of those client databases would be valuable to competitors, but the government contractor caught my attention. North Point Systems held several classified contracts with the Department of Defense. Their client information wouldn't just be valuable, stealing it would be a federal crime. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon learning everything I could about corporate espionage laws. What I discovered was fascinating. Under the Economic Espionage Act, stealing trade secrets could result in up to 10 years in federal prison. If the theft involved information related to national defense, like North Point Systems contracts, the penalties were even more severe. But the law also provided protections for whistleblowers who reported corporate espionage. People who came forward with evidence of trade secret theft could receive financial rewards and legal immunity. Interesting. Saturday morning, while Samantha was at her yoga class, or at least that's where she claimed to be going, I drove to Morrison and Associates and did some reconnaissance. The building's security was typical for a mid-sized firm. Keycard access, cameras in common areas, but nothing sophisticated. More importantly, I could see into the third-floor offices from the parking lot across the street. At 10:30 a.m., I watched Will Foster enter the building alone. At 11:15, Samantha's Honda pulled into the parking lot. She used her keycard to enter through the back door, the entrance that wasn't visible from the street. They were meeting on weekends in an empty office building to plan their theft of client data. I drove home and made a phone call to the FBI's corporate fraud hotline. "I'd like to report suspected corporate espionage," I told the agent who answered. "What type of information do you believe is being stolen?" Client databases from a firm that handles government contracts. I have documentation of the conspiracy, including communications between the perpetrators. The agent took my information and scheduled a meeting for Monday morning. I spent the weekend organizing my evidence and preparing for what would either be the smartest decision I'd ever made or the one that destroyed what was left of my marriage. Sunday dinner at Jennifer's house was surreal. Samantha sat across from me, making small talk about work and weekend plans, while I mentally reviewed the federal crimes she'd agreed to commit with her ex-boyfriend. "You're quiet tonight," Jennifer observed. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking about work," I said. "Big week coming up." I wasn't lying. It was going to be a very big week. Monday morning, I sat in a sterile conference room in the federal building downtown, across from two FBI agents who looked like they'd stepped out of a recruitment poster. Agent Sarah Martinez was the lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who took notes in precise handwriting. Her partner, Agent David Chen, operated the recording equipment and asked follow-up questions. I laid out everything: the GPS data, the recovered text messages, the timeline of Will Foster's recruitment of Samantha, and the evidence of their weekend meetings at Morrison & Associates. "This is substantial," Agent Martinez said, reviewing the printed messages. "How did you obtain these communications?" My wife's laptop was logged into her iCloud account. The messages were automatically synced. "And you have reason to believe they're planning to steal specific client information?" I handed her the list I'd prepared. "These are Morrison & Associates' major clients. Based on the messages, they're targeting the ones with the most valuable proprietary information." Agent Chen looked up from his notes. "North Point Systems is on this list." "Yes, they handle classified government contracts." The two agents exchanged a look that told me I'd just elevated this case from corporate fraud to national security. "Mr. Harrow," Agent Martinez said carefully, "we're going to need your help with this investigation." "What kind of help?" "The kind that involves wearing a wire." Tuesday evening, I sat in my kitchen wearing a device the size of a shirt button that could record everything within a 20-foot radius. The FBI had given me very specific instructions. Get Samantha to discuss the details of their plan, but don't push too hard, or she might become suspicious. Samantha came home at her usual time, 9:30 p.m., with Thai food and another apologetic smile. "Sorry, another late night," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "Will and I are making real progress on the Henderson project, though." "That's great," I said, helping her unpack the containers. "You two make a good team." "We do." The brightness was back in her voice. "It's like we think the same way, you know? We can anticipate each other's ideas." "Sounds like you're really in sync." "Exactly. Like today, he suggested a completely new approach to client data management, and I immediately saw how it could work. Most people wouldn't understand the technical side, but I could see the whole picture. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was celebrating. She was already talking about data management, exactly what the FBI agents had hoped for. "Technical stuff is your specialty," I said. "That's probably why he values your input so much?" "It is. And honestly, some of his ideas are pretty revolutionary. Like he's thinking about ways to leverage client information that nobody else in the industry is considering." "Leverage how?" She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "Just new applications. It's complicated. Try me. I might not understand all the details, but I'm curious about what gets you so excited about work these days." For a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. Her expression softened, and she looked like she wanted to share something important. Then her phone buzzed, and the moment passed. "It's Will," she said, reading the message. "He needs me to review something tonight." "Tonight? It's almost 10 o'clock. "I know, but this is time-sensitive. Client deadline." She was already gathering her purse and keys. "I'll be back in a couple hours." I watched her leave, then immediately called Agent Martinez. "She's heading to his place," I reported. Didn't get much, but she mentioned leveraging client information in new ways. "That's enough for now. We'll follow her and see what we can observe from outside." "What's the next step?" "We need more evidence of the actual theft. Can you get access to her work computer?" "Probably. She sometimes works from home on weekends." "Good. We'll need to document what information they're accessing, but be careful. If they realize they're being watched, they might accelerate their timeline." Wednesday passed without incident, but Thursday brought a development that changed everything. I was in my workshop when Samantha came downstairs, laptop in hand and panic written across her face. "Eliot, I need your help." I looked up from the engine I was rebuilding. "What's wrong?" "There's a problem at work. A big problem. We'll think someone might be investigating the company." My blood went cold, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of investigation? He's not sure. Maybe corporate espionage, maybe fraud. But if there's an investigation, it could affect everyone at Morrison and Associates. Including you? Including me. She sat down on the workbench, looking smaller than I'd seen her in weeks. Will thinks we should be prepared, in case questions get asked. What kind of questions? About client data access. About who has administrative privileges. About... She trailed off, staring at her hands. About what, Sam? She looked up at me then, and for the first time in weeks, I saw my real wife, scared, vulnerable, and very much in over her head. About things I might have done that could be misinterpreted. I set down my wrench and gave her my full attention. What things? Will needed some client information for a presentation, competitive analysis stuff. I helped him access some databases that technically I wasn't supposed to share outside the company. How much information? Enough that if someone wanted to make it look bad, they could probably build a case for corporate espionage. I felt the wire taped to my chest and knew the FBI agents were getting every word of this confession. Sam, I said carefully, what exactly did you give him? She told me everything. Client lists, proprietary research, financial projections, strategic plans, 3 weeks' worth of systematic data theft, all documented and ready for sale to Morrison and Associates' competitors. By the time she finished talking, I had enough evidence to put both her and Will Foster in federal prison for the next decade. But I also had something else. The first honest conversation I'd had with my wife in months. I think I'm in real trouble, she whispered. I looked at her sitting there, scared, guilty, finally telling the truth, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Friday morning, Agent Martinez called. We're moving today. Will Foster contacted a buyer for the stolen data. It's over. What about Samantha? If she cooperates fully, she might avoid prison. If not... At 10:30, Samantha phoned, sobbing. The FBI is here, arresting Will. They're seizing everything. They say I'm under investigation for espionage. Tell them the truth, Sam. All of it. Did you know? Yes, since I saw you kiss him 3 weeks ago. That afternoon, Martinez updated. Will in custody, facing 15-20 years. Samantha confessing, likely getting probation if she testifies against him. Evening, Samantha asked to retrieve clothes from her secret apartment. She apologized in the workshop. I loved him. I know. She left with her boxes. I returned to the engine rebuild. Some things could still be fixed. Our marriage wasn't one.